Bonjour, chers collègues. Bienvenue à la science après-midi. Good afternoon, everyone. Please have a seat. My name is Emmanuel, and today I will reporting live from New York ECOSOC chambers, and I will be passing the microphone to Cecile, and she will be talking about the drivers of sustainable peace and security, which is very vital in our society. Over to you, Cecile. Please have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SDG Media Zone. We're here to talk about youth, peace, and security. We have Barik from Jordan and Regine from the Philippines to talk about the work they do to support young people's involvement in peace and security. So my name is Cecile Mazzacurati. I work for the Peacebuilding Support Office and the United Nations Population Fund to support the development of the study on youth, peace, and security mandated by Resolution 2250. So why does Resolution 2250 matters? Because it opened up the doors of the Security Council and the peace and security realm to young people, for young people to show the work they do to support peace and to demonstrate how they are indispensable partners to build sustainable peace. So today, Barik and Regine, we're really eager to hear you speak about the work you do. Why does a resolution like 2250 matter for the work you do in your countries, and how can we support it?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, and thank you for having us. I think it's important to note that this resolution opened the gateway for youth to be involved in the SDG 16, peace, justice, and inclusive institutions. I think these two should always be linked to each other. It's important for the youth to be involved on one hand, but on the other hand, for them to keep in mind that these three things, peace, justice, and inclusive institutions, should always be together. And this is something that I've observed through my years of working with young people, that when we talk about peace, we don't necessarily always talk about historical injustices against minorities. And when we talk about justice, we rarely talk about peace education. And this will only happen if we continue to emphasize the role of inclusive institutions, for instance, educational institutions. I'll cite the example of the Philippines, where we've had 400 years of resistance from the Muslim region and down the south. And while we have our own Department of Education for the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, there remains to be a gap between education down south and mainstream educational institutions, where we tend to always teach peace education to students in conflict areas, but we don't provide space to talk about historical injustices in the capital or in major cities, and these two are interlinked with each other. And another instance is because last summer I was also working for the Abraham Fund initiatives in Jerusalem, and one thing that was emphasized was is not so much about the lack of access of Israeli Arab citizens to education, but the quality of education and the segregation of school systems. So this leads us to my major point, which is that you should stop talking about quantitative data on education, but also qualitative data, like what kind of education are we giving our youth, and what processes are we providing them to achieve that education. So like in Israel and Palestine, at an early age, youth or young children are exposed to that alienation of the other, because Jews study with Jews, Arabs study with Arabs. So there is a need to, it goes back to my main point, to interlink peace, justice, and inclusive institutions with youth security and peace. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Cecile, for having us today. I know we've crossed paths at many, important stations of the 2250 resolution, and I've seen firsthand how dedicated you are. So I would just like to thank you for that passion that you bring into the conversation. And building up on your point, I think what's as they say, what's historic about 2250 and what is unprecedented about 2250 is the fact that it, for the first time, a body like the Security Council, which is one of the most powerful bodies of the UN, acknowledges the role that young people play. And that's just not a nice thing to say. It's actually a prerequisite for any talk about development, any talk about sustainable development, and any talk about an inclusive future for young people. And why is it important? Because I think first and foremost, it gives us as young people a tool to lobby, a tool to advocate, a tool to go to our governments and ministers and different civil society organizations and even international donors and be like, okay, this is a framework for young people, we want to do something, and you should support us. You're mandated to support us. So that's one thing. Coming into maybe the technicalities or the details of it, I think what's also kind of unique about the resolution and the agenda as a whole is the fact that it challenges the stereotype of young people as perpetrators or victims of violence. And personally, coming from the Arab world and the Arab region, where conflict is more or less a norm, and I mean, you mentioned the Arab-Israeli conflict and the situation in Palestine. There's also Yemen, there's also Libya, there's also Syria, and all of these countries have their own different kind of forms of conflict. So for me, as a young Arab, I cannot relate more to the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 and to the work that's being done on it. And I try to kind of insert that in everything I do in Jordan. As you know, but maybe I mean, the majority of you don't know, but I work at a policy think tank, and we produce research, and we generate kind of knowledge, local knowledge from Jordan and the region, and specifically on issues related to youth and countering violent extremism and preventing violent extremism. So again, having that reference, that legal reference for me is immense, because again, it legitimizes the work I'm doing, and as well as it gives me a sense of empowerment, a sense of ownership over solving this problem. So again, I mean, we always hear about how historic it is, but it genuinely indeed is a historic resolution.
Great. And can you tell me, each of you, what do young people in the Philippines and in Jordan need for 2250 to become a reality, for it to be implemented? What is the type of support and partnership that you need, maybe from the government, from the international community, from NGOs, etc.?
I think I'd just like to emphasize my earlier point on the role of educational institutions. And it seems cliche when we talk about the role of education in peace building, but building up on my point that it's not so much just about access. We shouldn't talk about access anymore, but move on to the next level on what quality of education, what inclusive spaces are we providing our youth to discourse on sensitive topics like that are considered taboo in mainstream educational settings. And this is the only way that we can fully realize youth, peace, and security if we move on to the next level. Because just a while ago, I was at the side event on youth, peace, and security, and the data showed that there seems to be a correlation between education and peace building, but not necessarily a causation relationship. And my theory is that because we tend to focus too much on quantitative data, on the access of youth to education, but not so much on the qualitative data.
Well, thank you for the question, Cecile. And adding also to the point on education, the obvious answer would be that governments should come and support us in utilizing and operationalizing the resolution. This is certainly important. At the end of the day, we cannot really escape the formal and the official structures of governance and of state policies. Yet, I don't think that's just the full answer. A big part of this effort, I think, rests within the hand of young people themselves. So, for example, again, you asked about Jordan. In Jordan, up until this moment, despite the fact that we've played an integral role and a leadership role, I would say, in pushing forward this resolution, whether it was through the forum, the Amman Declaration, adopting the resolution and hosting the first regional consultation, but up until this day, we don't have a national youth policy, in the country. So that's a bit of a contradiction, maybe. That's a bit of, a misfortune. So that would be maybe one of the calls I would like, to take this platform to voice out. Having a national youth policy, one that is informed by not just the national and subnational development frameworks, but also the SDG framework, the youth, peace, and security framework, that would be a good first step. But I think even on a broader sense and on a broader level, what's really needed is for young people to feel that sense of ownership. I mean, allow me here to just briefly delve into, the social contract in the Arab world and the evolving social contract. For anyone, who's closely observing what's happening in the Arab region for the past, 2-3 decades, you would see that the social contract is changing in the sense that young people are no longer expecting things from their governments, but young people are thinking about their governments as an impediment in the way of them fulfilling their full potential. So the message there is clear. Don't just get to the side of me, and I'll take care of that. And one testimony perhaps to that, kind of nature of the evolving social contract is the percentage of young entrepreneurs in the Arab world. If you look across the MENA region, you have the youngest entrepreneurs in terms of, age-wise. It's the average age is, I think, 25 to 26. And not just the youngest, but also the hardest working entrepreneurs in the world. So these are young people, young Arabs, working 12 to 14 hours a day on businesses they've started, on businesses, on ideas they've come up with, as opposed to 10 hours per day as, the global average. So again, what does that tell you about, what's changing in the region? Young people are doing it on their own. You just give them the space and maybe get out of their way, and we can definitely take it forward.
Okay, so we got the message, get out of the way. But one last question before we have to wrap up. What can the UN do to help you?
With me, of course, just to give you some time to think. I think the UN can definitely play an instrumental role. One of the things that the UN can provide is obviously to pressure national governments into adopting these resolutions, into adopting these frameworks, and into following up on them as well. I know a lot of UN agencies. I mean, I personally was nominated to attend this forum by UNFPA Jordan because they've looked around and they've seen the work that young people are doing, and they're trying to amplify that voice, to give them more platforms, more spaces to share, to share their stories, and that is one thing that I think the UN can do and should do a lot more of, in terms of kind of providing that platform for different multi-stakeholders. One thing in particular I would really see, and I'd like to see the UN do and keep at doing, is be that honest broker between young people and their governments. I know of very small initiatives where a platform was offered by a UN agency to, and brought together, young people, different and local CBOs and, and NGOs, along with government and policymakers. And in all these events that I've attended, it was really, it really closed that distance, that gap between, us young people and the government. So that's also, I think, one area where the UN can really play an instrumental role in. And I'll probably leave the rest for Regine.
I'll just add just a few more points and amplify my previous point about SDG 16 and youth, peace, and security, which just tell us that the UN does have existing frameworks that are in place, and they have indicators that are well thought of, but it's just a question of how you translate it on the ground. So it would be really helpful to have a good monitoring and evaluation process to make sure that the indicators are followed in the national and local levels, because the frameworks are there, and SDG 16, like I said, it's formulated perfectly. Peace, justice, inclusive institutions, those three have to work together, and they have to fit into the youth, peace, and security framework at the same time. And the question is more on the how, actually, like how do you bring it to the ground?
Great. Well, thank you both. Congratulations on the great work that you do, and thank you for a really interesting discussion. Have a great day, everyone.